Uhuru, brothers and sisters and comrades. This is Omali Shatella, chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, and I'm leader of the Uhuru movement and the International African Revolution. Today, I want to talk to you about something that we're all familiar with, and we are constantly being refamiliarized with this issue because it has to do with colonial murder. And it is colonial murder that has been legalized by the colonial system itself in terms of the treatment by the colonizer of those of us who are colonized. And as you know, the colonizer is that force, that foreign and alien force that comes to dominate and control the lives of African and other people as an alien and foreign force. So this is what we're dealing with. And we're dealing with, of course, within the context of the trial that was begun on the 29th of March of Derek Chauvin, who is a colonial soldier, a domestic colonial soldier that's called police in the United States. And we say that he's a domestic colonial soldier called police. That's what we are saying, because everyone has noted that the way the media and the rulers of this country characterize Chauvin is a former police officer. That is distancing the police or the state itself from the offense that it has committed against African people. And it is an offense that is ubiquitous. It happens all the time and everywhere. And so we have themed this trial of Derek Chauvin as something about justice for us, justice for just us. Here we go again. And we say, here we go again, because on the 29th, we saw the traditional occurrences for every time a murder by the state, by the colonial power occurs. There is almost a script that you can anticipate even before the process gets in motion. And that's true because it's ubiquitous. Ubiquitous, it happens all the time. And so I want to talk about that. I want to say that when you saw, like on we've heard some of the testimony that began on the trial. We heard the dispatcher woman, a sister it seems, who said that initially she had to call the police, her sergeant, because she thought that the screen was frozen when she saw this man Chauvin, this colonizer, this colonial thug, dressed up in the uniform of the domestic colonial military force in our communities, on this man's neck for such a long time, and the man was not moving. She says she thought that something was wrong with the video, that the video had frozen. And so she asked somebody if the video had frozen, only to be told that it wasn't. And so this was a surprise to her. So she called her sergeant and to say that something was wrong. And we heard on the first day the testimony of a martial artist who reported that he said that Chauvin in his testimony was using something that I think he characterized as a blood choke hold or something like that. And then there was a 18-year-old woman who was 16 when this occurred, whose video was the first that people got an opportunity to see of the murder. And listening to the young woman and listening to the person who was a martial artist, who was like an expert in things like chokeholds, testify. And it was striking because it was clear that both of them were ashamed, and they both felt inadequate. They felt that they should have been able to do something. And they did not do what they thought they should have done, except the young woman did video. And the man, the martial artist, was yelling and trying to get them to stop killing George Floyd. And of course, they didn't stop, and they did execute George Floyd right there in the middle of the streets. And this, of course, has led to an extraordinary outpouring of resistance throughout the United States. This is part of what's causing a problem for them in Minneapolis at Hennepin Court, where this farce that they call a trial of Derek Chauvin is happening. This is what made it necessary for them to actually take Derek Chauvin to trial. We've seen it over and over again when the police has killed somebody. In some instances, it's gone weeks and sometimes months before anything is done by the state to deal with the cop who murdered it. And the only reason it did go is because people worked really hard to get the videos out, and people around the country and around the world was able to see it. And that put the colonial power in this political situation, this contradiction, that in order to validate themselves, they had to file some kind of charges against the policeman, against the soldier who committed the offense against the African. So here we have the situation where this young woman who took this video has a serious responsibility for the outpouring, the resistance that stemmed from it. But it wasn't that alone. And we need to say something about that, because part of what we've seen is that it's clear that the colonial powers cannot rule in the same old way, that they used to be able to execute us in this fashion. And what has been happening for a while now is the masses of African people have been rising up, and where we can't get justice, what we would characterize as justice in the colonial court, even if we don't understand that this is a colonial court and we are colonized. And the colonizers, in order to maintain their control, maintain their rule, maintain their resources, have now used these courts and the law for the purpose of making that, of keeping this thing stable. And so even if people have not recognized this a colonial court, they understand increasingly that the white man will not give you justice. And of course, the white man is the colonizer. And so we saw that in various other places after court, either the courts of rule, either grand juries, which are part of the system of what they refer to as the justice system, have ruled unfavorably in a way that satisfies the requirements, the immediate obvious requirements of colonial domination of African people, the need for the colonial state to keep us under lock and chain. Then we see these rebellions have occurred by African people that colonize ourselves, who are not calling ourselves colonizers, but are rising up against all of these instruments of suppression, oppression, that maintains the status quo, that maintains our poverty, our servitude. And so increasingly, the colonial powers cannot rule in the same way. And that's true in Hennepin as well. That is to say, right there in Minneapolis at Hennepin Court, where Derek Chauvin is being on trial. And so they've got up things like barricades at the courthouse. And this is not the first time we've seen this. We've seen them do this in various other places. We've seen this doing this all the way back to O.J. Simpson, before the jury could come back with the verdict, that they put up barricades to make sure that they call out National Guards and other specialized military forces to make sure that the colonized African people are going to be contained. This is a real serious kind of movement, where now the state, the colonial state, the colonial power has to be concerned. Where in the past they could do this, they could hold public lynchings, they could hold public lynchings that were not supposed to be legal lynchings, and then they could hold legal lynchings and not have to be concerned about any kind of unrest, any uprising by masses of the colonized people. But that's changed. And this is really something that is problematic for them. And this is something that we must understand, that the struggle of colonialism, the struggle of the colonized, our struggles are really responsible for contributing to this destabilization of the whole colonial system. And the whole colonial system is global, and it controls African people and other oppressed peoples around the world, either directly in the form of the domestic military forces in the United States, the National Guards in the United States, or other kinds of military forces like the Marines, and even when they use the National Guards in places in like Syria, in places like Iran, like Iraq, etc. The CIA, all of those forces constitute this state apparatus that they've got there to maintain the whole colonial domination of the peoples of the world, and African people are part of this people of the world. So the whole system, it's a rotten, nasty, foul system of white power that requires the oppression, that requires the destruction of whole peoples and communities, first of all, for its genesis, and now in order to maintain the status quo. And increasingly, it is necessary for all of these systems to be expressing themselves. The wolf has to bear its fangs and show evidence of its existence in order to maintain the status quo. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. I am not upset when I see them have to bring out the police as they have done in Hennepin at the court in Minneapolis. I'm not upset when I see that it becomes necessary once they kill a colonized, oppressed person for them to have to bring out all kinds of military forces. It is a statement that the colonized are coming to life, that the critical force that is necessary to destroy a social system based on genocide, based on rape and pillage, based on starvation of the vast majority of the peoples of the world. It is something that this system cannot operate in the kind of security that it used to operate in the past. So I am not dismayed when I see them. I recognize that it's necessary, and increasingly the colonized ourselves are recognizing that it's necessary, that we cannot be controlled, and that the system has a problem trying to contain us, that the system has to bring out the army, all these forces in order to carry out this blatant and public injustices against us. That's a good thing. It helps to awaken the masses of our people to what is happening to us and what is happening with us. So at the same time, this is happening. And there's a lot of drama. And there are probably things that's worth mentioning and worth learning from the actual court sessions themselves. I look at the fact that the young woman who testifies, and it's clear, and she states more or less that her sense of guilt, because she couldn't do anything. She said because the power, they had the power, and she couldn't do anything to stop them from murdering George Floyd. She was 17 when this happened. She was barely 17, and she's barely 18 today. And when she has testified, that's the case. And the martial artists. And I've heard even the clerk who worked at this Cups Food, where George Floyd purchased cigarettes, and who played a role in calling his management and had somehow played a role indirectly of having the police involved, because he thought the $20 bill that Floyd gave him was a fake $20 bill. And he has testified that he didn't think Floyd understood or thought it was a $20 bill, that Floyd didn't run. He went out and got in his car. They got testimony, said he saw him get in his car. He sat there and he said that two people, once he went with somebody else and somebody else approached Floyd, and Floyd just acted disbelieving about the whole thing, that this is crazy. This is more or less how this young man testified. And he was saying that he felt like it could have happened a different way. He said that also that he didn't want to see the police involved in it at all. But they have a policy at Cups Food that if he had taken that $20 bill and not said anything, that money would have come out of his paycheck. So there's some statement, there's some meaning there as well, but there's drama. And you have all these forces who in control of the colonial media, helping us to be caught up in the drama of this court, in the drama of this process that's going on. And the people, the white woman who is somebody EMT, emergency medical technician, or something to that effect, who stood up and challenged Chauvin when he was murdering him, and the other cops when they were murdering George Floyd, and saying that that you're killing him, and testified to that effect. So this was drama. And then even as this is going on, you have media pundits who describing what's happening here. And all the time they're saying things like, this is not the bad community that they say it is, that the prosecution or the ones who are defending Derek Chauvin are attempting to paint the picture of this community as being a bad community. It's a troubled community. It's a problematic community. And George Floyd, in the same way, this angry big black man was part of how they're saying that the persons who are defending George Floyd, defending Derek Chauvin, are trying to portray George Floyd and to portray the African community. But these pundits are telling us that can't be true. He said, we know it's not true because you had this white woman who was there, who was somebody who was an EMT specialist who stood out, and she didn't seem to be scared of anybody who was there. And this is evidence that there's nothing wrong with the community because the white woman could be there and the white woman wasn't being attacked. And you had the white woman who was testifying that she didn't want to leave because she was afraid of what the police were going to do with the Africans who were standing there. You had one of the channels I looked at where you have this African professor who's a lawyer or professor of law or something to that effect, who is working with this news channel, who testified that, the community is all right because she goes to this eating place on a regular basis while she's there covering the case. And she doesn't feel unsafe when she goes to eat. And she sees all kinds of people there, black people, white people, and other people. So clearly, this community is not what they're trying to paint it to be. And of course, that's problematic because the truth of the matter is that African people are colonized. And the truth of the matter is African people are angry. And there's nothing wrong with being angry if you're a victim of terror, if you're a victim of unemployment, if you're a victim of no health care, if you're a victim of not having enough resources to feed your family, if you're a victim of the police messing with you all the time, then there'd be something wrong with you if you weren't angry. So, but even those people who are supposed to be our friends and who are supposed to show how the system works well, which is effectively what they're doing, are trying to say that, black people are not so bad after all. But the truth is that the colonizer always, historically, has painted those who they victimize, those who are colonized, as dangerous, as barbarous, as uncivilized, and things like this. This goes all the way back to slavery, where people who captured African people and brought us into enslavement were saying that how they were rescuing us from the condition of barbarism when we were living as free people among ourselves. The enslaver, the colonizer, has always painted the colonial subject in a way that would justify the worst kinds of offenses and crimes being committed against those of us who are colonized. And the fact is, you have a social system, and this is something that must be understood, something that we talk about all the time, something that I talk about all the time, is recognizing and understanding the question of colonialism. And colonialism is not just a word that we call somebody. It's not just a pejorative. It's not just the something that you hear in a CIA-created Black Panther movie, where the CIA, whose character is characterized as a colonialist, but he is the one who is there helping this mythological African place that's thriving in the middle of the misery and poverty, genocide and exploitation and forced expropriation of value that's coming from Africa. So the reality is that we live with this kind of situation that uses various kinds of force to control us and has concocted this mythology of who we are as a people to justify its oppression and exploitation of our people. But this is what must be understood, because it's a whole system. And if you have a system that comes into existence through the colonization, the colonial slavery of Africans in the first place, and then other peoples around the world, they don't just control Minneapolis. They don't just control something that's happening in England. They control how the world understands reality, because they do this because the colonial capitalist system is a global system. The whole capitalist system rests upon a foundation of stealing capital, stealing value from Black people, stealing value from oppressed peoples around the world, and creating a global system of that. That system continues to exist today. It didn't go away. That's why people like to say slavery happened a long time ago. Killing the indigenous people of the Americas happened a long time ago. The colonization of oppressed people in places like New Zealand and all these other places happened a long time ago. But the reality is we're still living with the consequences of that because the system is still in place that continues to bring life to those who are the colonizers and take life from those who are colonized. That is a condition of the relationship. You cannot have colonialism. If you destroy colonialism, you destroy the colonizer and the colonial subject as well. Those who are colonized and those who are the colonizers are destroyed with the destruction of colonialism. And as long as you got colonialism, you got the colonized and you got the colonizer. And so what has to happen, of course, is the colonialism, the system has to be targeted, because the system of colonialism is more than what has ever been taught to us, more than what we've ever understood in African internationalism. The philosophy of the African People's Socialist Party has helped us to understand that colonialism is not just some moment in history that white people were involved in at our expense. Colonialism was really the advent of a whole new social system, where the world system has its genesis in what this thing that we call colonialism, and all the ideas that come from this now reflect this way that the society gets its living, gets its existence through the domination by foreign alien European power to begin with, against Africans and other peoples around the world, against the indigenous people in the Americas, against the people from whom they stole half of Mexico, against all of our people in places like Venezuela and Nicaragua and throughout the Caribbean, et cetera. This is where the whole system comes from. And this is what helps to define what the system is about. So you have this capitalism, you have this whole new social system. This is not feudalism from Europe. And this is not what the white people would like to have us believe is a capitalism that came about as a consequence of a natural maturation of contradiction that happened inside Europe. This is Europe stepping out of Europe, attacking Africa, attacking the rest of the world, and in the process creating a whole new world of colonized and those of us who, and those of them who are the colonizer. The whole world economy revolves around that. And this is where you see the source of ideas that reflect this relationship. You don't have ideas that in a system based on slavery that speaks to freedom, that promotes liberation. No, if you got a system based on slavery and colonialism, the ideas that come from that system, taught in all of its institutions, come from that. And even that's not enough, because an idea by itself cannot work. It cannot hurt us. It cannot harm us. The fact is that once you break away in this system, it is a system. It is a colonial system. It's not a colonial idea. And so the system punishes those who move away from the ideas that do not support the existence of the system and the relationship that the colonizer has to the colonized. If you can't get the wrong answer, you can't get the wrong answer on a test. If you're in high school, you can't wear your hair a certain way. You can't act a certain way, because the system will punish you if you do that. You can't say that I love Malcolm X. You can't say anything that I love Che Guevara. You cannot say that I love Comrade Maduro in Venezuela. You cannot hold up any force like that, because to do so will make you punished. They will get you punished by the system. You can't say I love revolution. You cannot say those kinds of things without punishment. You can't even talk on the medium that we are using right now to have this discussion without concern that the rulers would cut you off from this discussion, because you get punished if you say the wrong thing, if you break out of the matrix that has been created by colonialism for all of our relationships, including our thinking process, including the preachers who you love so much. None of them can say stuff. Look at what happened to this man who was Barack Hussein Obama's preacher, where Obama was there for something like 20 years sitting up and didn't know what the man was saying when the question came up, when the man was criticizing US colonialism and saying to the effect, God damn America. So this is what he was saying. This is what we are talking about. So But the truth is that the colonized masses of people are rising up. And this speaks certainly to the demise of colonialism, that the social system, no matter what they do, it is going to be destroyed by those of us who are victimized by colonialism. So, and the system is aware of that. So what you think about it, how you interpret, how you understand this reality, how the world understands this reality is something that we are involved in a struggle around as well. So here's what we've seen. Here you have this pending trial. I'm looking at this on the 29th of March, where the trial is to begin. And you see an array, you have as many media forces out there with cameras and microphones and things like that, as almost as they are protesters. And in the middle of this group of people, you see a part of the kind of industry that has emerged around the murder of Black people, because it's so ubiquitous. It's an industry that's surrounding us. And in the middle of these protesters, of these media forces in front of the Hennepin courthouse, you see Ben Crump, the lawyer, and you see Al Sharpton, the great civil rights leader. And there were some other people engaged in this public performance. And so you hear the lawyer and Trump and others who are around them declaring that this trial of Derek Chauvin, it will serve as a referendum on justice in America. That somehow America has the ability to redeem itself depending on what it does with this trial of Derek Chauvin. And in fact, the way this discussion is going, it's almost like they're begging America to live up to what is supposed to be its ideals, to give us, throw this dog a bone, some kind of bone, so that to validate the system itself. And so they're saying that this is going to be the referendum. They had testimony at this press conference for a cousin of George Floyd. And so, and then they got on their knees and on one knee with Sharpton and Crump and some of the others, where they were going to be on their one knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That was because there was a misunderstanding that was the length of time that Derek Chauvin was on the neck of George Floyd when it was actually 9 minutes and 29 seconds that he did this. And so they were to show through this dramatic thing just how long it was, and to show clearly that nobody could be on one knee on somebody's neck for 9 minutes or for 8 minutes, as they thought, in 46 seconds, without the intent to kill the person that they were dealing with. And that was dramatic, and that was true. Clearly, it couldn't happen in that way. But the point is that the way this was happening is that there's this whole notion that somehow this is the key thing, that this trial, whatever happens with this thing with Derek Chauvin, was going to be the referendum and determine whether or not there's any kind of justice here. And then there were militants outside, protesters saying more or less the same thing. And that this one time will be the one to determine whether there will be justice for Black people in this country. And the thing that was probably the most true thing that came from them was we heard people beginning to say that there are two types of justice in the United States. And that's true, because you have justice for the colonizer and you have justice for those of us who are colonized. And the justice for the colonized, those of us who are victims of colonial justice, cannot come about except by eliminating the justice of the colonizer. The justice of the colonizer will maintain colonialism. That's what it's for. That's what it's set up for. The system of slavery does not set up a system that would free the slaves. It sets up the system to maintain the slavery. And this is what we're looking at when you look at the court system in this country and all of the various kinds of institutions that have been established for that purpose. You have a situation now where I think, if I'm not mistaken, something like $27 million was won for the family of George Floyd. I think $12 million for Breonna Taylor's family. There's a lot of money in this industry now. So you rush to the scene. and these lawyers, and the lawyers, what they do, they have a role and responsibility, and civil rights leaders, of locking our people into an assumption that there's some redemption for America, that somewhere you can find your way out of this by going to the courtroom, by getting some justice in the courtroom. And even if the situation is such that the system, that the colonizers assume that the amount of people so outraged and moving around this question around George Floyd makes it necessary for them to do something to Derek Chauvin, they'll do it. The system, the state, will protect the state. The colonial state, the colonial apparatus, and the state is that organization of coercion. It's that bureaucracy and that organization of coercion that includes the police and the military and the court system and all of that. It's that organization. That's what the state is. And it's there in order to protect the status quo, to protect the ruling class, to protect the system of oppression that exists there. And yes, if it becomes necessary, if they think that the masses are becoming so conscious that they are moving against the system itself, they'll sacrifice Derek Chauvin. They'll throw him to the wolves. And they've done it before on other occasions. And it won't prove anything. This is what Sharpton, this is what Crump, this is what those liberals are trying to tell us. They are accomplices of colonialism. Because the truth of the matter is, before they murdered Nat Turner, who led this revolutionary movement in Virginia, who killed the slave owners, the people who oppressed and killed and mutilated and raped us under this system of colonial slavery. And when they captured him, they put him on trial. And he was found guilty in the trial. But even if he had been found not guilty in the trial, the system of colonialism will still be the system of colonialism. It still dominates our people. It's a foreign and alien power with the ability to bring us up before itself, to define whether or not we are legal or not legal, whether we are good or we are not bad or good. This is the system that's based on our oppression and the oppression of the peoples of the world. And it's a sleight of hand that they are using when they tell us that we have to concentrate on the legitimacy of the justice system, the legitimacy of America, depending on what happens at this trial. Because at the same time this trial is happening, even though it is not in the headlines in the same way, you've got the state of Georgia that has declared that Black people are going to be restricted in the ability to vote. The Constitution or the law says that you're supposed to be able to vote, but they said no. They said you can't even give water to somebody standing in the line. And what they've got is a situation where the average time of an African standing in line to vote is something like an hour, where it's in a matter of 6 to 10 minutes for white people. So they fix it so that you have to stand in line for an hour or more, and then they fix it so that if you bring water to somebody who's standing there, then you have committed some kind of offense. That means that persons are less likely to stand there because they can't get water, and especially if they have any kind of infirmities. That's the system we're living with. How in the hell do you separate what happened to George Floyd from that reality, from the fact that several states, I think I've read as many as 40, are changing the laws, especially in the South, in this country that will place restrictions on the ability of African people to even vote in this country? How does that relate to the case of George Floyd? How does what happened to George Floyd have something to do, make a determination around that fact? How does the fact that we have a situation where African people, even during this period of COVID, 2 to 4 times greater likelihood of being affected by this virus? How does that relate to the fact that we have a 7-year lifespan, less lifespan than the average? That's in the United States. But if you go to other places where colonialism exists, like in Sierra Leone, you've heard us talk about it, where the average lifespan might be 37 years. How the hell what does Derek Chauvin and George Floyd have to do with that? We're looking at a system that came into existence through taking away the rights and freedom of African people, and even the freedom to think, so that you have people who are afraid to think thoughts that will go against what white power has said you are supposed to be thinking about. This is the system of colonial domination that we live with. And we have people like the liberals who come out. And like I said, there's a whole industry. When Africans get killed, people make a lot of money. Some people, a handful of money. People, you got people who, African people who lived in obscurity for most of their lives. Never been anybody, never been anywhere, never been in the newspaper, never been on television. And suddenly, because they've lost a loved one, they're thrust into prominence and they become important. And what they say seems to mean something. And politicians drag them out and have them say this and have them say that and pretend that they are somehow for our people because they've dragged these poor people out who they've given some sense of significance by killing their children, killing their loved ones and things like that. This is a system of colonialism that we're up against. And as I said, there's a whole industry that revolves around them murdering our people. When I talked about the $27 million I think was paid to Floyd's family, or the $12 million that was paid to the family of Breonna Taylor, and the fact is that happens all around the country. And the cities don't have to even worry about it coming out the budget because they're insured for that. So the police can go out and kill people, and it's cheaper to kill us, to keep us under control, than it is to have any kind of justice, as they would characterize it, occur for us. This is the reality that we are living with. And so they are declaring that the US government is on trial. And we declare that the US government has been on trial for a long time by those of us who are colonized. And we have had you on trial. That's what happened in Cuba. That's what happened in Vietnam when the Vietnamese people had to fight against first the French colonialism and then you. That's what happened in Algeria when the people in Algeria had to fight against the French colonialism and now having to fight against US and world neo-colonialism. That's what happened in Africa, all over Africa. This is what we're living with, and they got us fighting shadows, saying that your problem is this particular situation and not the totality of the reality that we have created at the expense of your freedom. That you are in the situation you're in because we have systematized it. We've created structures. We created ideas that justify it. And everybody who participates in these structures and everybody who submits to these ideas participate in, and sometimes ourselves, in the dominance of colonialism over the rest of us. That's what we're talking about. Let me just say something, because this is a really interesting thing, because we see that we got through, particularly stemming from the George Floyd situation, that we saw there were protests. There were, since May 26th, the day after Floyd's murder, for several months until August, something like 10,000 protest demonstrations, sometimes actual uprisings that happen throughout this country. And this is testimony again of the critical role that the struggle for Black people are involved in play in undermining the whole system of colonial capitalist domination of the peoples around the world, not just because of that, but also because of the fact that in more than 60 countries around the world, people had demonstrations and protests around what happened in this case with George Floyd, because the US is the chief hegemon. It is the critical force that dominates the whole capitalist system, and everybody around the world is experiencing some relationship to that. And they know that historically the role that African people have played when we fought against colonialism in undermining the power of US imperialism against the peoples of the world. This is what people have experienced. And this sleight of hand is what we're looking at. And so they're talking about Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. But let me just share this with you briefly. Let's just go back for a little while. Let's look at a partial list of the police murders. If we go back to July 17, 2014, Eric Garner in New York. August 2nd, 2014, this is July, August 2nd, 2014, Tyree Woods in Baltimore, Maryland. August 5th, 2014, John Crawford III in Beaver Creek, Ohio. August 9th, 2014, Mike Brown, Ferguson, Missouri, which was one of the critical things that to occur. When Ferguson happened, that set new terms for how the struggle is going to look in this country, and also contributed to how people are having to deal with George Floyd today. August 12th, 2014, Ezell Ford, Los Angeles, California. August 12th, 2014, Dante Parker, San Bernardino, California. August 19th, 2014, Kajim Powell, St. Louis, Missouri. October 20, 2014, Laquan McDonald shot 16 times while running away from the police in Chicago. November 9, 2014, Aura Rossa. November 12, 2014, Tanisha Anderson in Cleveland. November 20th, 2014, Akai Gurley in Brooklyn. November 22nd, 2014, Tamir Rice in Cleveland. December 2nd, 2014, Romaine Brisbane in Phoenix. February 18, 2015, Janisha Fonville in Charlotte, North Carolina. March 6, 2015, Tony Robinson, Madison, Wisconsin. March 31st, 2015, Philip White, Vineland, New Jersey. April 2nd, 2015, Eric Harris, Tulsa, Oklahoma. April 5th, 2015, Walter Scott, North Charleston, South Carolina. April 25th, 2015, Eddie Gray, Baltimore, Maryland. July 13, 2015, Sandra Bland, Waller, Texas. July 5th, 2016, Austin Sterling, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. July 28, 2016, Paul O'Neill, Chicago, Illinois. July 6, 2016, Philando Castillo, St. Paul, Minnesota. September 16, 2016, Terrence Crutcher, Tulsa, Oklahoma. November 30th, 2016, Keith Scott, Charlotte, North Carolina. March 18, 2018, Stefan Clark, Sacramento, California. September 6, 2018, Botham Jean, Dallas, Texas. August 30, 2019, Elijah McLean, Aurora, Colorado. October 12, 2019, Tatiana Jefferson, Fort Worth, Texas. January 30, 2020, William Green in Prince George County, Maryland. March 13, 2020, Breonna Taylor, Louisville, Kentucky. March 23rd, 2020, Daniel Prude, Rochester, New York. May 25th, 2020, George Floyd, Minneapolis, Minnesota. June 12th, 2020, Rayshard Brooks, Atlanta, Georgia. August 23rd, 2020, Jacob Blake, Kenosha, Wisconsin. October 26th, 2020, Walter Wallace Jr., Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. November 8th, 2020, Frederick Cox, High Point, North Carolina. I mean, this is part of what it is that we're looking at. And then you had the vigilantes killings of Trayvon Martin in 2012. And on July 19th, 2018, Marquise McLaughlin in Clearwater, Florida. And February 23rd, 2020, Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. I mean, it's the whole array of these things that speak to colonialism. And how the hell do we get to this place where the case of Derek Chauvin is going to be the test of whether or not America really is for everybody, whether or not there is a way to improve this situation? Why are we in a trial that's supposed to be able to tell us that the cops do have proper training? How can we even continue to say that the response to this has to be something like body cameras when we are facing trials and uprising, because people have been able to see through video what's happening? And even as this is happening, the police departments are placing restrictions on what can happen with videos around this country. No, it didn't have anything to do with this guy, Derek Chauvin, this being the critical thing. How is this more critical than all the others that we just mentioned and those that did not get mentioned in this discussion? And there are many, 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 many more. And people who are watching this, you know that. Not just in this country, but around the world. And that's why people were so sympathetic with the uprising around George Floyd, because they experienced it in Kenya. They experienced it in Nigeria. They experienced it in various other places around the world where the US has some influence, where colonialism dominates either directly or indirectly. That's the struggle we're involved in. And that's what we have to fight against. And that's what the rulers don't want us to understand. And that's why you have people like Sharpton and people like Crump and all these other liberals who are telling us that the problem is somehow to make the system like us more, that the problem is some kind of racism or the attitude that white people have about us, and that the system is all right, that the system is a real democratic system that simply has to live up to what it's supposed to be about. How can a system that came into existence through an attack on the indigenous people of the US and around the world, and the enslavement of Africans and other people around the world, and the colonization of the people of the world, how can that be a just system? Regardless of what the hell they say about themselves, how can you be seduced by their own definition of who they are? How can you be involved in a situation where you learn to hate yourself because of who they say you are? No, brothers and sisters, the masses are waking up. And they are coming to terms with the being dominated by foreign and alien power. And that's what they're afraid of. And that's why Sharpton is valuable. And that's why Crumb is valuable. And that's why all these other liberals, and sometimes there are people who are in our midst, they are intellectuals who will intellectualize ourselves into a kind of relationship with the colonialism. They don't believe that African people have a right, or there's a direct relationship to our oppression and the struggle to overturn foreign domination. They don't believe in self-government by African people. They're clever, they are. They've read all the books by Marx, and they've read all the journals of progressive people, et cetera, where they liquidate the question of colonialism all the time. That's their job. They are afraid. They're afraid of revolution. They're afraid of freeing themselves and the people being free from colonial domination. They have no confidence in themselves, and they certainly do not have confidence in themselves. They don't have confidence in the mass of the people. I want to say this finally. I just want to share this with you, because what is happening, you probably saw that even officers in the US military, Africans, had to come out and say how disgusted they were what happened with George Floyd. And the New Republic just had an article recently about how it's hell to be a Black cop. And some of this relates to what happened to George Floyd, but also it relates to the reality that being a colonial subject in a colonizer's military force, you get treated like a colonized person all the time. The state is set up to oppress and the colonized, to oppress Africans, to oppress those who it dominates. So you can even be in their military as these Black cops are, and being treated like dirt, treated like trash. And so they complain about how bad they are. And then in the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, where I'm living now, they have this concept of some heroic 12. These are cops, African cops. They're heroic because they stood up and put up with all of the garbage and nastiness and nigger calling and things like that that existed in the police department of St. Petersburg. And while masses of African people in St. Petersburg, Florida, were rising up, fighting against the state, fighting against colonialism, they are heroes because they stood up inside the police department and took all the nastiness inside the police department that the masses of the people were refusing to take outside the police department. So they are heroes. This is what the system does. It will reward you for being for it. It will reward you for your loyalty. And even if you don't get rewarded at the moment, they'll dig you up when necessary and then reward you. Even though they had the police who beat up John Lewis and Pettus Bridge, going into Selma, beat him, clubbed him into the ground. Police did that. There was no Martian. These were not priests, this was the police who did that. And now, the same state now will hold him up as this glorified person. Why? Because he submitted to beatings peacefully, and they call it getting in good trouble, because you don't fight back, because you're on your belly, because you refuse to look at colonialism as the problem, and you keep our people locked into this myth that somehow there's something good, there's something gracious, there's something holy about submitting to the worst kind of terror being committed against Black people, but we don't do that anymore. And so you have in Tampa, Florida, just something to look at. There's a cop who was fired in Tampa. His name, ironically, he's an African. His name is Delvin White. And he was fired from his job with the Tampa Police Department after he used the word nigger in November. And so it is somebody who, after footage from his body camera showed him using the N-word, as they say, and they like saying the N-word now, and they got you down with the N-word too, because they are trying to hide the evidence of how they have treated us and how they have criminalized and despised us by you can't say the word no more. We tired of it now. And so we want to make it, we want to remove it from the vocabulary. So they showed him using the N word. This is what the CNN news report said. And they said that it was during a personal phone call that he was making and while making an arrest. And so what this guy did, he was an 8-year veteran of the police department. He worked in this place he was a so-called school resource officer at Milton High in high school in Tampa, Florida. Now, I don't know how it is any other place in the country, but in this area of the world, like this so-called school resource officer did not come into existence because kids were coming up, shooting up everybody on the campus. It came into existence with so-called desegregation, when white students and white teachers were coming into the same schools that African people were in. They were put there to protect white students and white teachers from Black people. This was a condition for the so-called desegregation, so that what happens is that the African students are constantly being treated like the colonial subjects they are, body slammed by cops. We've seen the pictures of that. This is a regular occurrence, and then sent to jail and prison, charged with assault for getting in an argument with a teacher. And so this guy was a school resource officer. And he is accused of even talking to his wife and talking about his nigga, talking about it to his wife like this. He was accused of talking about dealing with an arresting African, about you niggas, you know, y'all gotta stop this because I'm gonna be taken to jail. So he was fired. And he was fired because the system said he violated a city policy that prohibits discriminatory conduct. That's what the city said. Now, if he had said that to white people, that would have been discriminatory. But this is something that African people do all the time with each other. No, white people, you can't do it. And so what they were doing to use him as an example to get rid of this African on the one hand, and to hold up the city government as this wonderful place, this wonderful institution that presides over a state apparatus that protects people from words like nigger, etc., except they don't. They protecting people, they say, from words like nigger, while firing the African who they usually call nigger, and they will call him after, even as they are talking about this that they've done to him. So this is nonsense. And the state is the state. It's a colonial state. And it's not something that's done to protect us. There's nothing they do to protect us. And there's nothing that Sharpton and Crump and the rest of them can say that will make that case. I want to say, we're in a struggle against colonialism. It didn't just start. This is our history. And we didn't come to this conclusion just now. And the Black Revolution of the 60s understood that. Didn't just understand it in this country. Understood it in Algeria, understood it in the Caribbean, understood it in Cuba, understood it in Ghana, understood it in various other places around the world where the people were fighting against this domination, and they want to keep you from fighting against domination by saying what we want to have you to do is fight to be loved by those who dominate you. And so that's why they want you to fight against what they call racism. Because when you fight against racism, there is no outcome. How do you ever know when you won the struggle? You can't win that struggle. And so this is part of what it is that we're up against, and why we keep preaching, I keep preaching, that the struggle against colonialism is a struggle against the whole capitalist world economy, the whole capitalist social system. And you have to come to terms with that, because masses of Black people are striking out everywhere. And we have a responsibility to give them leadership in the struggle. I want to say that part of what we have done in the African People's Socialist Party, because there are people who will say, well, what should we do? And should we be involved? Yes, get involved in the protests, even if they're running around saying simple-minded stuff like Black Lives Matter. Get involved in the protests and then put out the propaganda. Get on the platform and speak that we are dealing with colonialism, because all those people who are standing up, they are not chumps. They're not people who are misled, who can be constantly and permanently misled by people who are opportunists and who will try to lead us into the swamps using terms like Black Lives Matter and fight against racism. We get in those demonstrations. We get on those platforms. We put out our propaganda and tell the people about colonial capitalism, tell the people about Africa and what has happened to Africa, that we are under attack and have been under attack for more than 600 years since the first white man put his foot on the continent of Africa and made an African do something against our will and initiated the development of a social system based on colonial terror and slavery. Put out that kind of propaganda. Do it even wherever you are. Use whatever platforms you have to take that out. And then what we have to say is that we have a responsibility to talk to these African cops who are complaining about their treatment, complaining about how the people view them. They view you because you're an instrument of the colonial state that oppresses our people, that kills our people, that murdered George Floyd. That's the organization that you are part of. And what you have to do is you have to split with that organization. And even if you don't split publicly by quitting that organization, you've got to join the revolution. You have to join the party. You have to become a part. When I say the party, I'm talking about the African People's Socialist Party. You have to become a part of that reserve force that when we talk about a Black community control of the police, you need to be there because you have certain kinds of experience that we are going to be able to use under our leadership, not under the leadership of the colonial capitalist power that exists today. This is what part of what it is that you have to do. And all of us, wherever we're located as organizers, we need to begin to create and deepen this split that exists between the African colonial subjects who are part of the colonial apparatus that's oppressing and killing us. And then put out public statements denouncing what it is that they're doing and calling on them to break with them, calling on them to join the revolution, calling on them to feed us information, calling on them to join the African People's Socialist Party and revolutionary organization. This is what has to happen. You must begin to do that. You have a responsibility. You can't just sit up there and create your own little internal police organizations where you're trying to improve situations for yourself. Or you said, I tried to stop the cops from doing that this time. The way you stop it is you engage in the struggle against the colonialism that's responsible for it. You join the party, you join the movement, you join the revolution. You become spies inside the organization. And it's our responsibility to put that kind of propaganda out wherever we are located. And among other things, what this will do is contribute to deepening the split inside the police, the state apparatus, the colonial state apparatus. Every colonizer should be suspicious of every colonized cop who is a part of that state apparatus. They must have to be concerned about whether that cop is working for African people or that he heard our messages are working for and with them. This is what has to happen. So I want to just share this with you quickly. And this is, again, the African People's Socialist Party has a 14-point working platform. It was created in September of 1979 and revised and adopted by the first Congress of the African People's Socialist Party in September of 1981. It's all about struggling against colonialism. It's all about the unity of Africa and African people. But this particular point, point 8, we want the immediate withdrawal of the US police from our oppressed and exploited communities. We believe that the various US police agencies which occupy our communities are arms of the US colonial state, which is responsible for keeping our people enslaved and terrorized. We believe that the US police agencies do not serve us, but instead represent the first line of US defense against the just struggle of our people for peace, dignity, and socialist democracy. Therefore, we believe the US police is an illegitimate standing army, a colonial army in the African community, and must withdraw immediately from our community to be replaced by our liberation forces whose struggles in defense of our community and against our oppression demonstrate their loyalty to our community and their willingness to serve in this interest. That's the fight against colonialism. That's the struggle that we have to win masses of our people to join. That's the clarity that we have to take to masses of our people, the colonized who want to fight and who are going to fight and who are fighting, but who need the kind of ideological leadership that only we can provide. And when I say we, I'm talking about African internationalists. I'm talking about forces who are fighting against real colonialism, and not some fake fight, not some fight that the colonizer is willing to offer you as some kind of improvement in the system of colonialism. And this is what it is that we have to do. So get involved and help the people understand this question, because colonial capitalism is in its deathbed. And what's going to kill it is the growing resistance of the people who are willing to fight on every front. Young people, old people, men, women, and the allies of our people who can't ally with us if our only objective is to make white people like us. If we're saying that we're fighting against racism, how do the people of Russia, how do the people of Iran, how do the people of Nicaragua and all these other places who are also engaged in a struggle with colonialism or imperialism, how can they actually in a material way unite with us? By asking white people, asking white America to treat us better? Or can they unite with us in the struggle against colonialism? That's what we have to recognize, our responsibility of making happen. And this is what we take in every relationship that we go to with international forces around the world. Rebuild the revolutionary anti-colonial movement of African people. Unite with the oppressed people fighting against colonialism, either direct or indirect colonialism around the world. Use this as an understanding that capitalism, the rotten, foul, blood-sucking capitalism, rests upon the foundation of colonial slavery, especially of African and African people around the world and all the other oppressed. Join the African People's Socialist Party, APSP, uhuru.org, APSP, uhuru.org. We are winning.